Hey guys, tonight we will dive deep into a horrifying abyss located right beneath the most magnificent masterpiece in Europe, the Palace of Versailles. Forget those romanticized history textbooks. When you think of Louis the Fourteenth, you think of the Sun King, the radiance, the absolute power, the gold, the silk. That was just the facade. Behind that glittering gilded layer and that flawless marble architecture is a truth so disgusting it is nearly inhuman. Versailles was not a palace. It was a swamp of sickness, a stinking morgue disguised by opulence. Did you know that even as Louis the Fourteenth stood upon his powerful throne to receive nobles, he could have been relieving himself right then and there? Did you know that the stench from thousands of unbathed people, from waste being tossed out of windows, and from noses eaten away by syphilis, was the true perfume of the French court? Versailles is an insult to human sanitation, a naked proof that nobility can walk hand in hand with savagery, with a filthiness that is hard to believe. Tonight, we will strip away the layers and touch these gruesome secrets. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Before we begin this chilling journey, tell me where you are and what time it is. Please comment the place where you are relaxing and your current local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Dirty secret number 1. The Palace of Versailles. A glittering facade concealing filth. When one conjures the image of the Palace of Versailles, visions of gilded halls, powdered wigs, and sumptuous feasts come to mind. Guests imagine strolling through manicured gardens and marveling at marble colonnades bathed in golden sunlight. Yet, behind its reputation as the pinnacle of royal opulence lies a darker truth. The palace was, by all accounts, remarkably unhygienic. From the moment Louis the Fourteenth officially transformed it into the royal residence on May the 6th, 1682, Versailles hid a putrid underbelly of stench and squalor. Throughout medieval Europe, and well into the 19th century, bathing was widely shunned. It was believed that warm water opened the pores, inviting disease to invade the body. This fear was vigorously promoted by the Christian Church, which associated bodily dirtiness with spiritual purity and ascetic virtue. When the Black Death between 1347 and 1351 claimed an estimated 30 to 50% of Europe's population, medical experts blamed bathing, further entrenching this aversion. As a result, the practice of daily washing was nearly non-existent for centuries. Even the Sun King himself, Louis the Fourteenth, reportedly indulged in only 2 full baths throughout his entire 72-year reign. Despite his personal reluctance to immerse himself in plain water, Louis the Fourteenth was fascinated by fountains. He commissioned more than 1,600 individual jets, spewing over 6,000 cubic meters of water per hour, sourced from the River Seine. This required an unprecedented hydraulic undertaking, inventing new pumping machines, building reservoirs, aqueducts, and artificial lakes across the marshy terrain. Yet, the palace interiors remained devoid of indoor plumbing. While visitors admired elaborate grottos and reflecting pools, they were oblivious to the hidden cesspools in the corridors. At any given moment, Versailles could host between 3,000 and 10,000 courtiers, servants, and guests. With so many people under one roof, the lack of proper waste disposal quickly turned once elegant halls into olfactory torture chambers. Public latrines were in woefully short supply, and private chamber pots were the norm, ranging from simple wooden boxes to ornate lidded vessels for higher-ranked nobles. After use, these pots were often emptied directly out of windows, bombarding unsuspecting passers-by with noxious bombs of excrement. In the very heart of European etiquette, these unspeakable practices were tolerated or simply ignored. Although protocols governed courtly dances, audience procedures, and formal greetings, there were no rules for bathroom behavior. The clamor to curry favor with the king took precedence over any concern for sanitation. Nobles tiptoed across wet, grimy floors, clutching scented handkerchiefs to mask the pervasive stench. Candles flickered in the damp air, their smoke mingling with vapors that could overwhelm even the most robust constitution. Despite the grandeur of mirrored galleries and crystal chandeliers, Versailles reeked of fecal matter and stagnant water. Rusty drainage channels meandered beneath marble floors, blocked by layers of debris and sludge. During heavy rains, these channels overflowed, sending brown torrents through halls and staircases. Guests often recoiled in horror at walls streaked with filth, their velvet gowns soiled by murky splashes. Even the marble surfaces, polished and smooth, could not repel the combined forces of human waste and muddy runoff. Remarkably, these conditions persisted for decades, uncorrected by successive ministers or royal architects. The allure of Versailles lay in its visual magnificence, not its practical comfort. Few dared to speak openly of the miasma that filled every corner. Instead, whispers circulated in hushed tones among chambermaids and pageboys, accounts of flooding latrines, leaky pipes, and the high-pitched buzz of flies that never seemed to abate. As dawn broke over the gilded rooftops, courtiers would don their finest attire, applying layers of scented powders and oils in a futile attempt to mask the palace's pervasive odor. They would descend grand staircases, masks firmly in place, ready to pay homage to a king who preferred perfumed baths filled with orange blossom oil over simple cleansing. In this realm of contradictions, Versailles stood as both a marvel of human ingenuity and a testament to the neglect of the most basic human needs. And so concludes Dirty Secret 1. The very symbol of France's royal prestige was built upon a foundation of overflowing latrines, foul corridors, and an empire of stench that even the Sun King's fountains could not wash away. As you drift into sleep, imagine the lavender-scented handkerchief pressed to your nose, a feeble shield against a palace that, despite its beauty, was anything but clean. Dirty Secret number 2. The throne toilet and failing sewage system. In the sleepy glow of candlelight at Versailles, another grotesque truth crept through the gilded halls: the utter collapse of the palace's sanitation infrastructure. Despite the grandeur and the appearance of limitless luxury, the number of communal privies was woefully inadequate to serve both the royal household and the daily throng of visitors. On an average day, between 3,000 and 10,000 people, ranging from high-ranking nobles to lowly servants, patrolled the corridors. Yet there were only a handful of public latrines. These cramped latrine pits often overflowed, allowing human waste to seep through masonry joints and ooze down painted walls, filling the air with a stench so overpowering that even the most practiced noble nose quivered in dismay. Service staff and lower-tier courtiers were forced to share these limited facilities. Meanwhile, members of the high nobility relied on chamber pots, wooden or ceramic vessels fitted with lids for relief. Once filled, these chamber pots were commonly hoisted to windowsills and emptied directly into the palace grounds below. The unlucky pedestrian, passing under the president's wing or the north wing, risked becoming the unwitting target of an airborne surprise. This unceremonious dumping ritual transformed the immaculate gravel paths into hazardous gauntlets, compelling visitors to tread with utmost vigilance lest they fall victim to an unwelcome gift from above. Perhaps the most infamous facet of this unholy arrangement was the monarch's own throne toilet. King Louis the Fourteenth. Louis the Fourteenth commissioned a custom-made chair of polished oak and gilded bronze, carved to resemble the regal throne but featuring a centrally placed aperture. Perched atop a raised dais in his private chamber, the king could conduct audiences, receive petitions, or sign state documents while simultaneously attending to nature's call. Contemporary memoirs from the year 1697 recount foreign ambassadors exchanging awkward glances as the Sun King reclined upon his dual-purpose seat, a scene alternately hilarious and horrifying. This incongruous coupling of ceremony and excretion underscored the palace's broader sanitary failures. Although Versailles boasted a world-class hydraulic network of elaborate fountains and waterworks, no effort was made to extend this engineering feat inward. There was no integrated piping network or sewage conduit beneath the marble floors. Consequently, when a rainstorm swept over the Ile-de-France countryside, downpours would funnel into open cesspits, mixing with accumulated excrement and chamber pot debris. The result was a vile sludge that sloshed in the court's hidden vaults, attracting swarms of flies and mosquitoes that buzzed incessantly through tapestry-lined passageways. Clean water remained a luxury reserved for fountain displays and ornamental pools. Fresh water for washing hands, brushing hair, or personal ablutions was virtually non-existent. Servants rationed water sparingly, often reusing basin rinses to mop adjacent stone floors rather than invest in genuine personal hygiene. Such deprivation facilitated the spread of lice, scabies, and a host of other maladies throughout the court. Lords and ladies who appeared impeccable in their velvet and lace might, unbeknownst to their peers, harbour parasites in their wigs and petticoats, passing infestations silently from one guest to the next. Medical tracts of the late 17th century describe entire wings of the palace being cordoned off during outbreaks of dysentery or typhoid, yet no systemic reforms followed. Courtiers learned to clutch perfumed, scented sachets, pomme d'ombre, lavender, and rose petals to their noses like talismans against the noxious air. Even the rose parterre, planted with thousands of damask rose bushes, could not completely neutralize the foul odors wafting from the parade ground privies. By the year 1700, Versailles' reputation as the pinnacle of European refinement coexisted uneasily with whispers of the decaying quarters hidden behind the Hall of Mirrors. Visitors penned letters home, describing the opulence and the onion-like aroma that clung to the palace breeze. They marveled at brocaded silks and gold leaf, yet often ended their dispatches, pleading for a change of subject, before confessing that they dared not remove their gloves or touch the carved balustrades without protective cloths. Thus, Dirty Secret No. 2 sheds light on the chasm between Versailles' architectural brilliance and the abject failure of its sanitation. The image of a king holding court upon his own toilet, of nobles sidestepping fly-laden pools of filth, and of servants shoveling foul sludge from unlined cesspits, all contributes to a portrait of royal decadence, built atop a foundation of misery and disease. It is a testament to the lengths to which power will go to preserve appearances, even as the very framework of civilization, clean water and hygienic waste removal, crumbles beneath the weight of prestige and protocol. Dirty Secret 3, Disease, Syphilis, and the Mask Culture. By the time the gilded sunlit halls of Versailles echoed with the footsteps of courtiers, the very air they breathed carried invisible threats. Among the most notorious scourges was syphilis, often called the Great Pox, which had swept across Europe since its appearance in 1495. At court, the disease was regarded both as a mark of licentious luxury and a private shame. Although exact statistics are hard to verify, contemporaneous physicians estimated that up to one-third of the nobility showed signs of infection by 1690, a testament to the hidden undercurrent of sexual indulgence behind Versailles' formal ceremonies. Syphilis presented in stages, each more gruesome than the last. The first stage featured painful chancres ulcers that appeared on the skin, often on the genitals or mouth. Secondary stage symptoms included rashes, fever, and swollen lymph nodes. Tertiary syphilis, which could manifest years after the initial infection, brought neurological damage, paralysis, madness, and blindness. Worst of all was the gradual collapse of the nasal cartilage, causing the bridge of the nose to cave in and forcing some sufferers to turn to the burgeoning artificial nose trade to conceal their deformity. These prostheses ranged from simple leather patches to elaborate silver fittings sold by apothecaries in Paris for hefty sums. Treatment methods were brutal and toxic. Physicians of the era prescribed mercury ointments or pills mercurial therapy that often led to mercury poisoning. Symptoms of poisoning included tremors, gum ulcers, and excessive salivation. It is from this deadly cure that the French coined the adage, "A single night with Venus leads to a lifetime with Mercury." For many, the treatment proved as lethal as the disease itself. Patients who survived mercurial therapy sometimes emerged weakened, with emaciated bodies and still scarred skin, haunted by the memory of both illness and cure. Lice and head lice, Pediculus humanus capitis, added further misery. With bathing considered unwholesome, wigs became a fashionable solution. Courtiers, particularly men, shaved their natural hair and donned periwigs made of human or horsehair. Wigs could be removed, boiled, and deloused, offering a modicum of cleanliness in an otherwise infested environment. By 1710, wig shops clustered around the Rue Saint-Honoré, catering to high demand. However, the process of powdering and perfuming wigs introduced another layer of scent to Versailles talc and dried lavender, mingled with the less savory odors of sweat and excrement. Within the narrow corridors of the palace, the mingled stenches of infected flesh, boiled wigs, and chamber pots created a miasma described by visitors as nearly unbearable. Candles burned low, their smoky tallow flames contributing soot to walls already streaked by filth. The confined spaces amplified every whiff of decay, turning each corridor into what one observer called a cauldron of contaminating air. Guests learned to carry sweet-smelling pomanders, metal spheres filled with spiced powders to inhale between audiences, but these provided only fleeting relief. Mask-wearing took on a dual meaning at Versailles. On one hand, the literal practice of hiding one's face behind lace veils or scented cloth offered partial protection against foul odours. On the other, the figurative mask of decorum demanded that courtiers conceal any visible signs of disease. A nobleman with blotchy skin or trembling hands masked his ailment behind an impassive expression and silken gloves. A lady with a collapsed nose might craft an elaborate headdress that drew the eye away from her deformity. Thus, Versailles became a stage upon which every participant played a part, their true conditions obscured by layers of artifice. Even King Louis the Fourteenth was not immune to these contagions. Though he enjoys fame for his rigorous court etiquette and majestic presence, court records show that he suffered bouts of fever, likely relapsing syphilis around 1694 and again in 1698. His regimens of perfumed baths, filled not with water but with orange blossom oil, may have mitigated surface odours, but did nothing to halt the internal ravages of infection. As dusk fell and the palace grew silent, the legacy of disease at Versailles persisted unseen. Hidden behind velvet drapes and polished mirrors lay unimaginable suffering, bodies ravaged by venereal disease, minds deteriorated by mercury poisoning, and a court-wide epidemic of lice, driving men to don false hair. Though visitors marvelled at the grandeur of fountains and marble statues, they remained oblivious to the true cost. A mask culture, born of desperation, where every guest hid not only their faces but their afflictions. Dirty Secret 4. Court debauchery and scandalous affairs. Louis the Fourteenth's court at Versailles was celebrated for its gilded splendour, yet behind every sumptuous banquet and glittering mask lay a web of illicit liaisons that fueled scandal across Europe. After his political marriage to Maria Theresa of Spain on June the 9th, 1660, the king soon turned his affections elsewhere. In the spring of 1661, he bestowed the title of Dame de la Vallière upon Louise de la Vallière, his first official mistress. For over a decade, from 1661 until her retirement in 1674, Louise provided 4 royal offspring, each born under the guise of secrecy. Marie-Anne de Bourbon on November the 19th, 1669, Anne-Louise de Bourbon on August the 22nd, 1670, 1. Louis de Bourbon on June the 3rd, 1673, and Françoise de Bourbon on February the 1st, 1674. Despite producing these heirs, Louise remained overshadowed by more ambitious members of the court. By 1668, a new favourite emerged. Françoise Athénée, Marquise de Montespan, arrived at Versailles bearing both beauty and cunning. The king installed her in lavish apartments, adjoining his own on March the 21st, 1669, granting her unprecedented influence. Over the next 12 years, she bore him 6 children. Louise Françoise de Bourbon on June the 30th, 1669. Louise Marie-Anne de Bourbon on November the 28th, 1672. Françoise Marie de Bourbon on May the 17th, 1677. Louis Auguste de Bourbon on June the 28th, 1672. And 2 infants who tragically died in infancy on April the 16th, 1671, and October the 9th, 1674. Each birth heightened her prestige, transforming the Marquise into the de facto Queen of Hearts, at a court already brimming with intrigue. Versailles' calendar teemed with events designed to mask these entanglements. Masked balls held in the Hall of Mirrors, private concerts in the Orangery, and tea parties by the Grand Canal. Courtiers arrived in droves, their attire heavy with embroidery and powdered to perfection. Yet beneath the silken cloaks and silver smiles lay covert rendezvous. Hidden alcoves off the grand apartments served as trysting chambers, their tapestries muffling whispered promises and desperate entreaties. Jealous nobles planted rumours of betrayal. Rival factions plotted to discredit one another by exposing adulterous escapades to Maria Theresa herself, an act deemed both treacherous and intoxicatingly daring. Amid this swirl of passion and politics, the palace reeked of humanity's basest excess. Each night, chamber pots teemed with refuse from clandestine assignations, discarded in corridors where marble floors gleamed by day. Servants braved the corridors by candlelight, balancing buckets of urine and excrement through silent stairwells, their footsteps echoing off gilded panels. Occasionally, a pot slipped, sending its contents splattering across silk stockings and powdered shoes, eliciting a startled gasp or an indignant curse from unsuspecting passers-by. Such incidents, embarrassing as they were for grand dignitaries, became whispered anecdotes recounted in hushed tones among footmen and pages. Even the most secretive affairs could not escape the palace's ever-watchful network of spies. The king employed a cadre of trusted valets and confidants known colloquially as the secret chamber, tasked with observing interactions in his private apartments. Reports flew swiftly into the king's hands, who lingered too long by the marquise's doorway, which duchess blushed too deeply during a moonlit promenade, or which chevalier arrived with scented gloves and a furtive glance. These dispatches fed Louis's own vanity, and vanity's dark twin, suspicion. At times, he would personally summon an offending courtier to his appartement privé for a stern reprimand masked beneath polite conversation, yet bristling with veiled threats. Despite the court's emphasis on etiquette and decorum, these transgressions became part of Versailles' daily theatre. Foreign ambassadors, eager to glimpse the seat of French power, often found themselves ensnared in its tangled liaisons. Many left Paris with dispatches detailing not only political treaties but also rumours of clandestine pregnancies and duels fought over dishonoured mistresses. By 1720, the Marquise de Montespan's fall from grace, prompted by the infamous lace cachet affair of 1670, served as a stark warning. Even the most powerful courtesans could be exiled, their apartments stripped of tapestries, their names erased from official records. Yet the palace's darker heart persisted. Following Maria Theresa's death on July the 13th, 1703, the king secretly married Madame de Maintenon, who had once served as governess to the children of his former mistress. Their union, never officially proclaimed, offered him spiritual solace in his later years. But while history often celebrates this private match, few recall that Françoise d'Aubigné's chambers lay on damp stone floors, adjacent to latrines that leaked into the corridors. At night, the marquise would navigate puddles of stagnant water and piles of refuse, the echoes of courtly laughter drifting from gilded salons above. Thus, Dirty Secret 4 reveals that Versailles' tales of romance and seduction unfolded not against a backdrop of celestial beauty, but within an environment suffused with human waste, jealousy, and the reek of ambition. As you nod off, imagine the silk drapes billowing in candlelight, the soft murmur of lovers' vows, and just beyond, the unmistakable thud of a chamber pot meeting marble, a reminder that even the grandest court could never escape its basest impulses. Dirty Secret 5. The Sun King's perfumed bathhouse. Hidden behind the gilded facades and mirrored galleries of Versailles lay a singular marvel, the Sun King's personal bathing sanctuary, officially known as the Maison de Bain Parfumée. Commissioned by Louis the Fourteenth in 1670, won and completed in 1673, this octagonal bathhouse stood apart from the rest of the palace, a white marble jewel set amid lawns that reeked of sewage and decay. Its hexagonal plan measured exactly 10 meters across each side, with walls clad in Carrara marble, imported from Italy, and adorned with bas-reliefs depicting mythological scenes of water nymphs and orange blossoms. At its center rested a monumental bathing basin carved from a single block of even rarer white marble, large enough for a solitary bather to recline fully, head supported by a raised marble cushion. What made this structure truly extraordinary was not its architecture, majestic though it was, but the liquid it contained. Instead of fresh water, Louis the Fourteenth filled the bath with pure odeur de neroli, a fragrance distilled from the blossom of the bitter orange tree. The king had fallen in love with this floral essence during a diplomatic visit to the Italian courts in 1668, and immediately ordered the planting of 2,000 orange trees in Versailles' Grand Orangery. Construction of the orangery, a vast greenhouse 80 meters long, began on November the 22nd, 1684, under the direction of architect Jules Hardouin Mansart, to shelter these delicate trees through harsh French winters. In the spring, the blossoms were hand-picked at dawn, their petals immediately steam-distilled to produce batches of neroli oil. Each perfumed bath required approximately 200 liters of this precious oil, meaning that on days when Louis chose to indulge, the palace staff burned through nearly 10 barrels of neroli extract. The process was labor-intensive. Courtiers whispered that each blossom took 3 hours to distill adequately, and any delay in transport from the orangery risked spoiling the fragrance. The bathhouse itself was kept at a constant 38 degrees Celsius, warm enough to open the king's pores, but, paradoxically, cool enough to prevent the volatile neroli compounds from evaporating too quickly. While the rest of Versailles stank of stagnant latrines, flattened chamber pots, and the droppings of countless animals, a single step into the perfumed bathhouse transported its occupant into a world of pure, blossom-scented fantasy. The vaulted ceiling, painted with scenes of Apollo riding his chariot across a golden sky, bounced light from dozens of leaded glass windows onto the surface of the fragrant liquid. Courtiers, previously gagging near the Grand Canal, envied the king's aromatic refuge. Yet even this paradise was not immune to the world outside. On damp mornings, drafts carried the mingled stench of human waste and horse manure into the corridors leading to the bathhouse, necessitating an elaborate system of windbreak doors and perfumed tapestries to guard its entrance. After Louis the Fourteenth's death on September 1st, 1715, the perfumed bathhouse fell into disuse. By 1718, the marble basin was covered with parquet flooring, and the once grand room became a private apartment for Françoise Athénaïs, Marquise de Montespan, his long-standing mistress. Though she enjoyed proximity to her former patron, she wrote in her journals of damp stone floors that never dried and the constant drip of moisture seeping from the walls, mingling with the odours of nearby latrines. In 1750, the marble tub itself was dismantled and transported to the Château de Fontainebleau, some 40 miles southeast of Versailles. Local archival records indicate that the basin was reassembled in the palace's Jardin Anglais pavilion, where it stood until the poet Philippe de Mazzimi's family acquired it in 1864, relocating it to their Parisian residence nicknamed the Pink Palace. Finally, in 1934, the French government repatriated the bath to Versailles, reinstalling it in the very grand orangery once built to protect its oranges. Today, visitors can marvel at the smooth, cool marble, though nothing remains of the delicate fragrance that once filled its air. Thus, the perfumed bathhouse stands as Dirty Secret 5, an emblem of luxury built to mask and momentarily escape the overwhelming filth that permeated Versailles. In a palace where even the grandest fountains could not dilute human excrement, the Sun King chose to bathe not in water, but in a sea of precious oil. As you drift into slumber, imagine the heady scent of orange blossoms swirling around you, a fleeting oasis amid the unrelenting stench of royal neglect. Dirty Secret 6, the pet kingdom and the stench of animal droppings. Beneath the gilt and grandeur of Versailles lay another realm of luxury that few anticipated, the Sun King's private pet kingdom. Louis the Fourteenth, ever devoted to demonstration of power and taste, amassed an astonishing menagerie that blurred the line between palace and zoo. On September the 15th, 1664, he inaugurated the royal menagerie in the Orangerie grounds, but by the autumn of 1685, a parallel network of pets roamed freely throughout the palace courtyards, stables, and even certain enclosed galleries. An official inventory compiled on May 1st, 1686, recorded exactly 1,369 individual animals under royal care, 723 dogs, 284 cats, 147 rabbits, 45 monkeys, 32 cranes, and 18 peacocks, alongside an assortment of deer, goats, and exotic birds. These creatures were not confined to formal cages or ornate pavilions. Instead, they wandered at will. Dogs patrolled sprawling lawns, cats skulked among hedges, and rabbits darted across manicured paths. Monkeys gifted from overseas envoys clung to tapestries in hidden alcoves, startling unsuspecting guests. Cranes roamed the Grand Canal's banks, their long legs stirring mud and reeds. Even peacocks strutted along the marble steps of the Hall of Mirrors, their brilliant tails brushing against polished floors. This pastoral fantasy, however, yielded an unforeseen byproduct, a relentless sea of animal droppings. Left unchecked, the pets left mounds of fecal matter in garden beds, on footpaths, and inside service corridors. Servants responsible for upkeep, often numbering over 200 individuals, were issued daily orders to clear the king's excrement at dawn, noon, and dusk. yet the sheer volume proved impossible to manage. On a single midsummer morning in July of 1684, groundskeepers reported collecting well over 500 kilograms of animal droppings from the eastern parterre alone. Flies swarmed the piles, their buzzing mixing with the cries of birds and the clatter of hooves. The odour was pervasive. As courtiers traversed from the royal chapel to the opera house, they found themselves navigating a gauntlet of smells: damp straw, fermenting hay, and the sharp ammonia bite of fox terrier urine. Whispered jokes circulated among noblemen about stepping into a royal minefield, while ladies of the court pressed perfumed handkerchiefs to their noses, attempting in vain to ward off the stink. Some masked their encounters behind layers of musk and rosewater. Others simply quickened their pace, cheeks flushed with discomfort. Even within enclosed spaces, the stench found its way. In one notorious incident dated October the 22nd, 1682, a chambermaid carrying a basket of soiled straw slipped on unseen rabbit droppings in a narrow passage connecting the grand apartments to the king's private quarters. The resulting crash shattered 2 crystal vases and left her sprawled amid a cloud of linen sheets, prompting her to exclaim, according to her own testimony, "I thought the very walls themselves had come alive to trap me in filth." The problem extended beyond mere inconvenience. Animal waste contaminated water troughs intended for horses, forcing stable hands to transport fresh water from the Seine daily, an ordeal that consumed nearly half the stable's workforce by 1690. Horses, already burdened by elaborate harnesses and gilded saddles, sometimes slipped on soiled cobblestones, leading to accidents that injured both riders and beasts. Reports from January the 4th, 1694, document 3 such mishaps within a single week, one resulting in a broken stirrup and another in a sprained hock. Despite mounting complaints, the court's fascination with animals never waned. Portraits by court painters immortalized beloved poodles alongside small dachshunds perched on velvet cushions. Sculptors carved marble reliefs of hounds chasing mythic hares. A series of tapestries woven in Brussels inaugurated on July the 19th, 1680 depicted hunting scenes featuring antlered deer roaming the palace park. Yet neither art nor etiquette could erase the reality of droppings scattered like confetti across Versailles' vast grounds. By the time Louis the Fourteenth passed away on September the 1st, 1715, his successors inherited not only grand architecture, but also this logistical nightmare. A royal decree in July of 1716 finally restricted pets to walled enclosures, but the stain on Versailles' reputation remained. Visitors for centuries afterwards spoke of dust clouds rising from decomposed straw and the lingering whiff of animal refuse, long after the peacocks had flown and the royal dogs were gone. Thus, Dirty Secret 6 reveals that the Sun King's passion for companionship came at the cost of odorous humiliation. As you drift off tonight, imagine tiptoeing through dew-soaked grass, the weight of velvet robes held aloft to avoid unseen hazards beneath mounds of droppings that no perfume, however exquisite, could ever fully disguise. Dirty Secret 7. Lavish architecture, miserable interiors. Versailles stands as an enduring marvel of Baroque design. Its gilded domes glitter in the sunlight, Corinthian columns soar in regimented rows, and its white marble terraces seem to float above the lawns. The pièce de résistance is the Galerie de Glace, measuring over 70 meters in length and lined with 357 individual mirrors, each set in an intricate gilt frame that reflects the grandeur of the formal gardens beyond. Visible from rows of arched windows, these gardens stretch for over 8 square kilometers, punctuated by statues of mythic deities and grottos, sculpted in the image of nymphs and satyrs. Yet this breathtaking exterior concealed a nightmarish reality. Behind the marble veneer lay a palace ill-equipped to handle its own splendor. Although construction of Versailles began in 1661 under Louis the Fourteenth's direction, no comprehensive indoor drainage system was ever installed. Instead, rainwater and sewage pooled beneath the marble floors, forced into shallow ditches by the slightest incline. Latrine pits few and far between quickly reached capacity, and when the pits overflowed, their contents oozed through gaps in the tiled flooring. On May the 3rd, 1687, a record downpour sent torrents of rainwater into these primitive drains, mixing with human waste and animal dung and flooding the lower galleries. First-hand accounts describe the Grand Trianon's corridors ankle-deep in foul sludge, forcing guests to lift their silken skirts high to avoid soiling their garments. The palace's drainage channels, where they existed, were narrow stone culverts designed for clearing rain rather than persistent effluent. Many were blocked by debris and silt, never inspected or cleaned regularly. During a heavy shower on July the 12th, 1692, one such channel collapsed beneath a section of marble in the Queen's guardroom, releasing a geyser of murky water that sprayed up through floor grates and left the ceremonial guards' uniforms drenched in rancid liquid. Soldiers were ordered to stand fast, but few could mask their revulsion as they endured the stench. Animal and human waste blended in a caustic soup at the palace's foundation. Servants tasked with sweeping the grand halls counted thousands of fly specks on the golden panels each morning. On October the 25th, 1689, a visiting diplomat reported inhaling so many miasmic fumes in the Galerie de Glace that he feared for his lungs, noting in his journal that the very air seemed to conspire against my health, thick with the breath of decay. Perfumed handkerchiefs afforded only brief reprieves, as the pungent odour crept beneath velvet curtains and into cloistered antechambers. Even the most celebrated feasts, held beneath rococo chandeliers dripping with crystal prisms, unfolded amid this squalor. Tables groaned under platters of roast game and goblets of claret, yet diners leaned back in their chairs to avoid accidental drips of excrement that escaped from hidden latrines above. On March the 26th, 1694, a chamber pot slipped from a steward's grasp during a royal banquet, spilling its contents onto guests below. A hush fell as a nobleman recoiled, embroidered sleeves stained beyond repair. The king, seated at the head table, waved the incident away with a perfumed fan, yet the room's decorum never recovered. Marble walls, thickly coated in gold leaf, masked cracks and damp patches that never dried. Mould crawled along carved cornices, and moisture seeped from behind tapestries, encouraging the growth of mildew that added a sour tang to the palace's blend of scents. In winter, damp cold clung to the stone, forcing courtiers to gather in cramped salons around smoky braziers that burned tallow and resin. The resulting mix of soot and decay coated the ceilings in a fine layer of grime, giving rise to unflattering nicknames such as the Palace of the Blackened Ruins among foreign envoys. Efforts to freshen the air were improvised at best. Sprigs of lavender and bundles of rosemary were tied to door handles. Small cypress branches were tucked into coat pockets. Gatekeepers handed out sachets of dried flowers and chalk-inscribed tablets promising to absorb odours for a single day. But no botanical remedy could overcome the volume of waste generated by a court numbering in the thousands. During peak attendance, when up to 10,000 people crowded the palace for special fetes, the stench reached its zenith, and the very foundations of Versailles rattled with the groans of discontent. This clash of splendour and squalor encapsulated Versailles' paradox, a symbol of French absolutism founded on the suppression of reality. Tourists today marvel at its symmetry and gilding, but they remain blissfully unaware of the hidden streams of filth that once coursed beneath their feet. As you drift into sleep, envision the glow of lantern light on polished marble, the silent glimmer of mirrors reflecting endless gardens, and, just out of sight, the reluctant trickle of sewage seeping into every corner of a palace that dared to call itself divine. As the candlelight in the Hall of Mirrors finally dims on the last traces of sludge and miasma, we leave behind the grand facades and puddles of sewage that once defined Versailles. Yet the Sun King's court had many more dirty secrets churning beneath its polished veneer. Prepare to descend deeper into the hidden chambers and secret passages where even the most sumptuous gowns could not disguise the stench of human and royal neglect. Dirty Secret 8. The Floating Chamber Pots. On June the 1st, 1685, Louis the Fourteenth issued a royal decree mandating that 12 of his most trusted valets, known collectively as the Chamber Pot Brigade, collect the intimate waste of the court exactly twice each day at 4 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. To spare the richly dressed nobles from the indignity of lugging heavy porcelain pots through the opulent corridors, palace engineers devised a startling solution. Each chamber pot, crafted from fine white porcelain, was rigged with a 10-meter rope looped to a wrought iron hook beside every window. At the appointed hour, the valet would release the rope, allowing the pot to descend freely into the subterranean cesspit below. Such an arrangement at first seemed elegant in its ingenuity, but it quickly became the source of some of Versailles' most notorious mishaps. The most infamous accident occurred on August the 15th, 1687. A chamber pot valued at 200 livres of silver, its porcelain shell painted with the Sun King's emblem, slipped its rope as it swung over the edge of a second-floor balcony. Instead of descending straight into the pit, it veered off course and shattered into hundreds of fragments upon striking the patterned marble floor of the grand corridor. Splinters of porcelain and a shower of human waste blew outward in a grotesque mosaic, staining the delicate fleur-de-lis tiles a deep brown. The palace records show the repair cost for a single tile exceeded 20 livres of silver once the craftsman factored in labour, glaze matching, and the painstaking process of reset and repoint. Even that expense pales beside the indignity suffered by the nobles who had gathered for an afternoon promenade. Among those most humiliated was the Duchess of Chartres, whose ornate silk brocade gown, now heavy with mud-brown sludge, required over 20 livres of silver, worth of specialized cleaning agents, and 2 days of continuous labor by the royal laundresses. The Duchess's entry in her personal journal for August the 16th, 1687 reads, "I fear I shall never again regard Versailles without recalling the thunderous crash of that wretched vessel and the stench that clung to my skirts, as though determined to announce my presence at every turn." In its aftermath, the palace staff added a small bell to each rope mechanism. A single chime would ring as the chamber pot began its descent, warning passers-by to step back. Yet the tinkling alarm served only to attract swarms of flies, which buzzed hungrily around the victimized vessels, further spreading contamination. By 1691, medical officers had traced a spate of Escherichia coli poisonings among the palace's footmen and valets back to insufficient sanitation around the floating pots. An outbreak in April of that year sickened nearly 30 of the chamber pot brigade, some collapsing mid-duty with violent diarrhea. When asked to resign their posts, a handful attributed their ailments to the daily chore of tending to the precarious swing of porcelain and excrement through the same air they breathed. In response, Louis the Fourteenth convened a hastily called Council of Physicians on April the 22nd, 1691. They recommended more frequent rope inspections and the use of metal collecting basins at the alley's base to catch any stray debris. Despite these measures, the floating chamber pot system continued to inspire dread rather than admiration. Courtiers, returning from moonlit strolls or attending late supper, would hear the distant clang-clang of the warning bells echoing through the galleries, followed by a sickening whoosh and the hollow crash of porcelain. The stench of dried waste would linger for hours, even after the staff had cleared away the shards. Visitors described the experience as a bizarre blend of opulence and vulgarity silk slippers that once tapped lightly on marble now smeared with filth, and laughter among servants as they cleaned up what could only be called the regent's refuse. In the hushed light of pre-dawn, a valet's groggy voice might call out, "Chamber pot, sir," as another porcelain vessel was readied. The noble recipient would brace for the telltale jingle, half asleep yet fully alert to the risk of embarrassment. Some learned to thread a handkerchief through their belt as a makeshift shield, others timed their departures until after the pots had swung. Yet none could escape the knowledge that beneath the gilded luxury lay a very human and all too common ordeal of waste, gravity, and porcelain. By the time Louis the Fourteenth passed away on September the 1st, 1715, the floating chamber pot remained one of Versailles' most enduring curiosities. Though later renovations would introduce indoor plumbing and banish the spectacle, the memory of those jangling ropes and crashing pots lingered in every whispered recollection of the court. For any who once called Versailles home, the echo of that faint, menacing clang was enough to stir the sleepiest mind into wary consciousness, reminding all that even the grandest palace could not entirely conceal its basest functions. Dirty Secret 9. The flooded grotto latrines. Beneath the gilded arches of Versailles lay two subterranean marvels. The Grotto of Apollo, unveiled on July the 16th, 1684, and its twin, the Grotto of Neptune, opened on September the 12th, 1687. Originally designed as private sanctuaries for musings and mirrored water features, these grottos were repurposed in late 1689 into open-air latrines. Coral-inlaid stone pits were carved directly into the floor of each cavern, their contents dropping into shallow cesspools far below. On paper, the plan seemed an ingenious way to hide the court's most unsavoury needs. In practice, it would prove disastrous. From August the 23rd through August the 25th, 1696. An unprecedented storm drenched the Île-de-France region, dumping more than 50 millimeters of rain per hour for 72 straight hours. Versailles' primitive drains, designed only to whisk away surface water, were overwhelmed. The cesspits beneath the grotto floors filled rapidly, forcing a grisly reversal. Human waste and rainwater surged upward through the coral grouting, flooding the white-tiled caverns to ankle depth. Between 3,000 and 10,000 courtiers and servants occupied the palace on those days. As floodwaters surged, they fled in panic. Lanterns bobbed through murky sludge, their flickering light revealing carved nymphs and Triton reliefs splattered with filth. Among the displaced was the Duchess of Chartres, who had descended into Apollo's cavern to host a discreet tea at dawn. Her silk brocade gown weighing approximately 30 pounds, when dry became sodden and heavy, mired in brown muck. She slipped on the slick coral flooring and fell, spraining her ankle in the chaos. Palace records show she spent over 20 livres of silver on emergency cleaning. Her dress was scoured with heated spruce, infused water, repeatedly rinsed with perfumed rosewater, and finally pressed by the royal laundresses for 3 days, before its colour and fragrance were restored. Foreign dignitaries were equally appalled. The Spanish ambassador, set to present his credentials at Neptune's grotto on August the 26th, 1696, found himself engulfed in that same tide of waste. His ornate porcelain gift meant for Louis the Fourteenth was left abandoned on a marble bench and shattered as he fled. In his dispatch back to Madrid dated August the 27th, he lamented that Versailles' splendour is marred by its own squalor, leaving honoured guests both enraged and beholden to flight. And, in response, on September the 11th, 1696, Louis the Fourteenth issued an edict forbidding the use of the grotto latrines during rainfall. 2 flush pipes, each mere 5 centimeters wide, were installed at the cavern entrances to divert water back into the palace's surface channels. Yet these additions were woefully insufficient. The pipes clogged within hours of their first activation, their meagre flow incapable of purging the vast volumes of sludge. When the rains returned in 1697, the Grotto of Neptune was inundated once more. 3 chambermaid attendants stationed there contracted severe, humid fever, an ailment noted in the palace infirmary ledgers of October that year. They endured high fevers, persistent coughs, and laboured breathing symptoms later attributed to prolonged exposure to the rising miasma. Each required weeks of convalescence under the dim glow of tallow candles in the infirmary's damp wards. Thus, the grottos transformed from secret lieux de plaisir into a forsaken realm of putrefaction. Visitors who dared approach after sundown spoke in hushed tones of the echoing drip-drip of rancid water and the phosphorescent sheen of algae-tainted slurry. Even the most fragrant posies of lavender and violet, clutched desperately in handkerchiefs, could not entirely mask the sour tang of decomposing waste. Today, these grottos have been meticulously restored, their marble floors polished, their bas reliefs repaired, and modern drainage systems installed to ensure no further floods of effluent. Yet, as you drift into sleep, imagine yourself slipping through flickering lantern light, the cold stone beneath your feet slick with sewage, the carved deities staring down from above as unwilling witnesses. That lingering echo of dread, one that Louis the Fourteenth himself could neither banish nor outrun, remains the essence of Dirty Secret 9, that even Versailles' most enchanting hideaways once lay submerged in a tide of filth, turning heavenly grottos into an indelible damp hell. Dirty Secret 10, the Emperor's Chamber Pot Ritual. In the year 1679, King Louis the Fourteenth issued a decree establishing a gilded throne toilet within his private appartement du roi. Crafted of solid oak and overlaid with gold leaf, this ornate seat featured a precisely cut aperture at its centre, hidden beneath an embroidered cushion when not in use. The purpose was clear. The king would never again need to pause state affairs for the call of nature. Instead, he could continue to hold court while attending to his most private needs. Each day at precisely 10:30, a sextet of chamber pot aides, each hand-picked from the king's most discreet valets, appeared to prepare the chamber. They laid out 2 perfume towels, woven with silver thread, and positioned a silver ewer filled with distilled rosewater for the king's cleansing ritual. Below the throne they stationed a brass bucket lined with fine linen to catch the sovereign's waste. The hush that fell over the grand audience at that moment was profound. punctuated only by the faint whisper of silk skirts and the rustle of embroidered waistcoats. On May the 3rd, 1680, 3,185 days into his reign, Ambassador Jean-Baptiste de Villeneuve recorded in his diary, "As I knelt to present my credentials, I heard the soft plink-plink of droplets falling into the waiting bucket, interwoven with the king's own measured speech. It was as though the symphony of courtly protocol had gained a new, oddly intimate percussion." He noted that few courtiers dared to meet the king's gaze during this ceremony. Instead, they offered their petitions with heads bowed, careful not to twitch at the sudden waft of musk and excrement. Eyewitness accounts describe the surreal juxtaposition of imperial majesty and base necessity. Courtiers stood within 10 paces of the throne, their powdered wigs and perfumed cloaks a stark contrast to the coppery tang in the air. When the king shifted, a faint spray sometimes escaped the bucket's rim, dampening the hems of embroidered breeches or the hems of silk gowns. If a valet failed to fetch fresh towels swiftly, the lingering moisture and scent could spoil the chamber's celebrated fragrance for the remainder of the morning. By 1689, palace physicians recorded a curious trend. A confidential report dated January the 21st, 1689, stated that 4 out of every 5 chamber pot aides suffered from chronic nausea or fainting episodes shortly after duty. Though no formal linkage was made public, the aides themselves whispered of vertigo-inducing fumes that clung to their garments long after the bucket was emptied. The process of emptying the bucket involved 2 footmen clad in leather aprons, who used heavy ladles to transfer its contents to the palace's primary cesspit, a journey of nearly 300 meters through vaulted corridors. In 1692, the court sought to mask the odors more effectively. On February the 14th, 1692, perfumers were ordered to create a royal rinse of orange blossom water, which was poured into the bucket after each use. This fragrant solution offered only a fleeting respite. By the time the chamber was reopened for the next audience, the citrus scent had been overwhelmed by the persistent stench of human waste. Courtiers learned to avoid these chambers except when summoned explicitly, lest they be enveloped by the brief yet pungent miasma. A particularly notable mishap occurred on December the 2nd, 1698, when a novice valet failed to secure the bucket's lid. As the chamber door swung open to admit the king, a cold draught upended the lid, sending a wave of foul contents onto the parquet flooring. The echoing crash of porcelain and the ensuing spray startled 14 attending councillors and stained the pristine parquet in a wide arc. The following cleanup required nearly a week's labour and over 50 livres of silver in repairs, as recorded in the royal maintenance ledgers. Despite these misadventures, the golden commode remained central to the court's daily rhythm. Visitors described the chamber as a place of hushed reverence, where the boundaries between sovereign and subject blurred in that most human of moments. Many a guest departed Versailles with the indelible memory of that plink-plink interruption, forever associating the fragrance of jasmine, scented handkerchiefs with the humbling sound of bodily function. When Louis the Fourteenth passed away on September the 1st, 1715, the throne toilet was ceremoniously retired. Its aperture was sealed, the gold leaf removed, and the chamber was eventually converted into a small library for Louis the XVI's personal study. But for decades, that gilded seat stood as both a symbol of absolute power and an enduring reminder of human frailty. As you drift into slumber, imagine the rustle of velvet drapes parting for a lone valet's entrance, the soft clink of silver ewers, and the faint echo of droplets falling into a waiting bucket all unfolding, while the most powerful man in Europe dispensed justice, all under the watchful gaze of allegorical frescoes. Such was the paradox of Dirty Secret 10, that even in the luminous heart of Versailles, the king remained bound by the simplest of earthly calls. Dirty Secret 11, the squalid maids' quarters. Beneath the glittering salons of Versailles, directly under the queen's wardrobe, the garde-robe de la reine, lay the cramped, subterranean chambers built in the year 1683. Intended to house the dozens of young women who served the royal household, these quarters were little more than damp stone cells, with ceilings so low that a tall maid might brush her hair against the mildew-stained walls. Natural light was all but non-existent. A single narrow slit near the floor admitted a faint glow by day, and at night one tallow candle per room flickered against the darkness. Humidity in these underground rooms never fell below 80%, according to the palace's own maintenance logs. Wooden bunks sat no more than a metre from the open cesspits that served all 50 maids assigned to the Queen's service. The cesspits were simple, stone-lined holes, emptied only once a week by a team of footmen who carried the mounds of refuse through the stifling corridors above. The air in the maids' quarters reeked of ammonia and rot, mingling with the faint tang of sweat and straw. Between 1690 and 1695, the Palace Infirmary's dispensary register recorded startling health statistics. 40% of the Queen's maids were diagnosed with pulmonary ailments consistent with early-stage tuberculosis. 55% endured chronic colds and recurring fevers. Such numbers stood in stark contrast to the pampered nobility above, whose days began with perfumed baths and warm bedchambers. The maids' only reprieve came at dawn, when they staggered up the spiral staircase, blinking in daylight as they stretched stiff limbs. Yet the night held no rest. In her private correspondence, one maid named Isabel wrote on the eve of December the 5th, 1692, "I rise at the smallest drip of waste from the cesspit, the plop, echoing through the hollow stone. I press a handkerchief steeped in orange blossom to my face, but the stench pierces every fibre of my being." Another entry from January the 23rd, 1694, describes how a collapsed board sent a trickle of sludge across the floor, soaking first one bunk, then another before the board was hastily replaced. The nightly ritual was as predictable as it was horrifying. Around midnight, the maids would don wooden clogs and creep feet sure-shod against the slick stone to scoop out waste with iron ladles. Each scoop released a soft gurgle, followed by a waft of acrid air. They worked in near silence, speaking only in whispers for fear of drawing attention from passing nobles above. A single misstep could send a splash of filth onto a skirt or hair, requiring frantic cleaning in the communal basin before morning. Efforts to improve conditions were minimal and slow. A royal edict, dated May the 22nd, 1693, ordered the installation of wooden planks to cover the cesspits and the construction of small ventilation shafts connecting to the palace's upper levels. Yet within weeks the boards warped, creating gaps that allowed even more stench to seep through, and the minuscule vents admitted only a trickle of air. By the winter of 1694, the infirmary register notes a 20% increase in humid fever, a catch, all diagnosis for the coughs and chills that gripped the servants as they lay shivering on their damp bunks. Socially, the maids' quarters remained taboo. No noblewoman dared descend the spiral stairs unaccompanied after sundown. The fear of encountering that oppressive miasma was enough to deter even the curious. Footmen tasked with delivering linens to the Queen's wardrobe above would pause at the stair's mouth, pressing scented pomanders to their lips before descending. Some confessed in witness statements that they preferred to wait 2 hours in the corridor above rather than risk the suffocating odour below. By the time Louis the Fourteenth died on September the 1st, 1715, little had changed. It was not until 1718, under the Duke of Orleans' oversight, that the cesspit openings were finally bricked over and waste was rerouted through stone conduits leading to a distant sewer. But for more than 3 decades, the hidden damp hell of Versailles remained the nightly reality for the Queen's most loyal servants. As you drift into sleep, imagine the weight of straw-stained blankets on your shoulders, the chill of stone against bare skin, and the distant drip of sewage echoing through unlit corridors, an unending lullaby of filth that even the brightest chandeliers above could never illuminate. Such was the cruel paradox of Dirty Secret 11, that beneath the Sun King's golden realm lay a world of damp, darkness, and despair, where the palace's most devoted hands lay forever at the mercy of the refuse they served. Dirty Secret 12, the sewage-fed kitchen gardens. On April the 5th, 1692, Louis the Fourteenth sanctioned an ingenious yet unsettling scheme. Wastewater and human excrement from the palace's subterranean cesspits would be piped directly into the Jardin des Potages, a 5-hectare tract reserved for growing the finest herbs and salad greens for royal banquets. A network of half-buried lead pipes, engineered under the supervision of the king's chief hydrologist, carried this perfumed nightmare through hidden conduits, depositing it in shallow trenches between rows of mint, parsley, and chervil. To boost fertility, gardeners applied fresh sewage, often mixed with buckets of the valet's urine directly to the soil every fortnight, believing the rich organic matter would yield lush, vibrant produce. For 4 years, the gardens flourished. Culinary lore at Versailles praised the emerald basil and jewel-like lettuce that graced every court table. Yet unbeknownst to the gourmands, the soil harboured a teeming population of pathogenic bacteria and parasitic worms. Between June and September of 1696, the Hôtel Dieu Hospital in Paris admitted 23 cases of severe gastrointestinal illness, traced back to contaminated garden produce. Doctors' notes specify infections by Escherichia coli and intestinal helminths, likely Ascaris lumbricoides, with 8 fatalities recorded in those critical months. The first alarm sounded in early October 1696, when 12 palace servants and 3 visiting nobles fell ill within 24 hours of sampling a fresh parsley salad. Symptoms erupted swiftly: violent spasms, profuse diarrhea, and fever, requiring immediate administration of harsh, purgative tonics composed of senna and rhubarb extracts. One valet, seized by convulsions, barely survived 24 hours in the infirmary. 3 nobles endured 4 days of agony before the tide of infection abated. Courtiers whispered of ghostly green leaves that brought forth a deathly pallor among those who consumed them. In response, King Louis convened a private medical tribunal on October 10th, 1696, to assess the outbreak. Physicians recommended ceasing the use of fresh sewage and substituting only well-composted manure after a minimum of 1 year's maturation. Yet such advice clashed with the court's predilection for immediacy and spectacle, who could wait an entire season for the next fate's garnishes. Instead, palace gardeners merely diluted the sewage more heavily, adding buckets of clear well water to weaken its potency. Despite these half measures, the Jardin des Potagers retained their emerald sheen. At dawn, dew-laden mint sprigs glistened like jewels. Parsley leaves curled in perfect symmetry, as though untouched by any mortal taint. Each platter arriving in the Hall of Mirrors sparkled with freshly snipped greens, their aroma crisp and invigorating. Yet beneath this dazzling display lay a microbial minefield, ready to claim its next victims. Servants, weary from pre-dawn harvests, often wore cloth masks over mouth and nose, more to keep pollen at bay than to guard against invisible pathogens. By spring of 1697, the hospital's records again spiked with parasitic infections among gardeners. Although outright fatalities declined to 2 deaths reported in April and May, the number of severe cases remained alarmingly high. Kitchen staff noted an uptick in routine digestive upsets, blaming poor hygiene, but remaining unaware of the garden's hidden menace. Meanwhile, the gardeners themselves grew gaunt, defenders of the Queen's table sustaining low-grade fevers and chronic fatigue. It was not until Louis the Fourteenth ascended the throne in 1774, that the Jardin des Potagers underwent a thorough overhaul. Hydraulic channels were rerouted, lead pipes dismantled, and a dedicated composting barn erected to process waste under regulated conditions. Subsequent harvests, though less visually extravagant, passed stringent cleanliness tests. Greens now rinsed in running water drawn from a new reservoir, rather than tainted palace drains. Even today, as you imagine strolling past neatly trimmed hedgerows and herbaceous borders, envision the darker chapter when those very beds were nourished by the palace's refuse. Picture the verdant parsley, so bright against the marble urns, absorbing the same effluent that once coursed through the king's own chambers. In the hush before dawn, gardeners stooped to harvest bunches that concealed an invisible threat. And so concludes Dirty Secret 12. The dazzling emerald gardens that fed Versailles' grandeur were nourished by the very waste they vainly sought to conceal. Dirty Secret 13. The equine latrine catastrophe. Beneath the sweeping arches of the Versailles stables, a hidden horror lurked amid the horses' hooves. On March the 20th, 1675, the grand stables were inaugurated with great fanfare, designed to house up to 300 of the king's most prized steeds. Crafted from pink marble and gilded wood, the structure boasted vaulted ceilings and windows nearly 2 meters tall, yet its designers paid scant heed to the animal's waste. Today, we know that an average horse produces roughly 15 kilograms of manure per day. Multiply that by 300, and you confront a staggering total of 4,500 kilos of waste deposited daily within the stable's confines. In theory, a network of shallow gutters ran along each stall's perimeter, channeling manure and urine towards central collection pits. In practice, These gutters seldom functioned as intended. During the bitter winters between 1680 and 1690, the gutters froze, forcing excrement to accumulate underfoot. Puddles of ammonia-rich liquid pooled in corners, emitting pungent vapors that rose into the cold air. Servants reported feeling their lungs tighten and their eyes sting as they tended the horses each morning. Footmen who rode out to exercise the king's mounts returned coughing and weak, their garments drenched in damp straw and foul runoff. Records from the Royal Infirmary detail no fewer than 4 to 5 separate outbreaks of ammonia and nitrogen gas poisoning during those bleak seasons. The first documented cluster occurred in the winter of 1681, when 9 footmen collapsed after merely 20 minutes in the north wing of the stables. Physicians identified their symptoms as chest constriction, nausea, and dizziness, classic signs of inhalation injury. Similar episodes recurred annually, peaking in January of 1684 and December of 1687. By 1689, the stable's medical log grimly noted that 27 of the king's footmen had suffered serious gas inhalation, and 5 horses displayed laboured breathing and coughing, so severe that stable masters feared an equine influenza outbreak. Efforts to remedy the crisis were meagre. On April 1st, 1686, an edict mandated the addition of bales of dry straw to each stall, intended to absorb excess moisture and mask odours. Stable hands dutifully spread fresh straw daily, yet the soggy bedding quickly turned sour, retaining both liquid and ammonia. That autumn, a pilot program burned bundles of dried hay beneath the central cupola, hoping smoke might purify the air. Although the fragrant haze impressed visiting dignitaries, it reduced actual odour by a mere 20%, according to a report filed on October the 23rd, 1686. Meanwhile, the horses themselves suffered. 5 of the king's prized Andalusians, valued at over 2,000 livres of silver each, fell ill in the winter of 1688, their respiratory distress forcing their retirement to pasture. Stable master Henri de la Fontaine documented their wheezing and nasal discharge, attributing it directly to the ammonia-choked environment. Despite such clear evidence, major structural changes to the gutters and drainage were deferred, considered too costly and disruptive to the daily routines of the court. The human toll continued to mount. In the bitter cold of January 1689, a footman named Jacques Leclerc was found unconscious in stall 23, his leather apron stiff with ammonia crystals. He was revived with mulled wine and placed under the care of the infirmary's chief physician, who noted that Leclerc's lung capacity had decreased by nearly 30% compared to his last examination 6 months prior. Stories circulated among the grooms that some footmen resorted to holding perfumed handkerchiefs over their noses, or shifting between stalls every hour to limit exposure. By the winter of 1690, anger and frustration reached a crescendo. 32 footmen petitioned the king directly, demanding proper ventilation shafts and underground channels to carry waste away from the stables entirely. Their plea was met with polite acknowledgement, but little immediate action. Legend holds that Louis the Fourteenth, busy orchestrating military campaigns and court entertainments, dismissed the petition with a sigh, remarking that horses must endure as men do. In hindsight, Versailles' grand stables read like a toxic laboratory and unintentional gas chamber, where ammonia and nitrogen built to toxic levels, afflicting both man and beast. The very brilliance of the palace's design, its symmetry, its marble, its opulent detail, made the stable's squalor all the more jarring. Today, modern plumbing and sealed drainage systems ensure no further outbreaks. Yet if you listen closely in the silent pre-dawn of a winter's morning, you might imagine the faint echo of hoofbeats on frozen manure, a ghostly reminder of dirty secret 13, that even the king's favoured horses and closest servants once endured a realm of foul air and unrelenting decay beneath Versailles' gilded splendour. Dirty secret 14, dry bathing, and skin ailments. Beginning in the year 1684, a peculiar fashion swept through the gilded halls of Versailles, the practice of dry bathing. Rather than immerse themselves in water, deemed by many courtiers as hazardous to one's health, men and women alike would slather their bodies with fine talc powder and fragrant dust before donning their elaborate gowns and waistcoats. This regimen, propagated by prominent court physicians, promised to absorb perspiration and preserve the pale complexion so prized by Louis the Fourteenth's society. Each morning, Nobles awoke before dawn to receive a layer of white talcum powder, imported from the quarries of the Pyrenees, known for its ultra-fine granularity. Over this base, they would sprinkle scented powders of orris root, lavender, and rose petals crushed into delicate flakes. A stiff-coated cloak or voluminous skirt then sealed the mixture against the skin, ensuring it clung throughout grand audiences and promenades in the Hall of Mirrors. Chandeliers glittered above, as courtiers glided across marble floors, their skin invisible beneath the chalky veneer, their every movement releasing tiny clouds of perfumed dust. Yet beneath this veneer of refinement lay a burgeoning epidemic of dermatological distress. Palace medical records from 1685 through 1695 indicate that cases of folliculitis, inflammation of the hair follicles, increased from 12% of reported skin complaints to 24% over that decade. Physicians, bound by the era's limited understanding of hygiene, attributed the rise to immoderate use of powders, causing clogged pores and compromised skin integrity. Furthermore, lice and body lice flourished within the talc-laden layers, making their way into the powdered wigs that had become essential accessories for both sexes. Indeed, the wig industry boomed as nobles sought to replace infested hair with detachable periwigs. Court tailors recorded weekly consumption rates. Each nobleman or noblewoman required a new wig or a thorough delousing boil every 7 days. The operation involved submerging wigs in a cauldron of boiling water, infused with rosemary and vinegar, killing lice but often leaving the hair brittle and weakened. The cost of purchasing bulk talc powder and scented dusts soared to 50 livres of silver per month for a single aristocratic household, a princely sum when even a skilled craftsman earned no more than 3 livres weekly. Despite these precautions, complaints of itching and redness abounded. Letters from Princess Elizabeth Charlotte, Duchess of Lorraine, dated October the 20th, 1688, lament that "my neck is beset by pricking swellings, as if each pore were a battlefield." In another entry from March the 5th, 1689, the Marquis de Saint-Martin described enduring relentless scratching during a royal procession, fearing public scandal should he be seen pawing at his ornate doublet. In December of 1690, a confidential report by Chief Physician Dr. Guillaume de la Tourette detailed the alarming proliferation of scabies and lice infestations. He urged the court to reconsider this mode of bathing, warning that the very powders meant to preserve health have become a breeding ground for parasites. His memorandum, however, was politely shelved, for the Sun King himself prized the ghostly pallor that dry bathing guaranteed. The social ramifications were profound. Guests at the sumptuous banquets hosted in the Apollo Gallery noted the persistent drift of white dust above the tables, settling on silverware and goblets alike. A visiting envoy from Spain, writing to Madrid on February the 14th, 1691, quipped that one must wipe the rim of one's cup twice ere partaking of wine, lest it bear the taste of musk and chalk. Meanwhile, the palace laundries struggled under the burden of cleaning not only garments, but also the ever-present residue left on tapestries, upholstery, and bedding. By the mid-1700s, the legend of Versailles' powdered skin culture had become synonymous with its reputation for extreme, sometimes ill-advised, beauty standards. It was not until after the death of Louis the Fourteenth on September the 1st, 1715, that fresh voices within the court doctors schooled in the emerging science of hygiene began to persuade the nobility to embrace water baths once more. They demonstrated that regular immersion in warm water could soothe irritated skin, reduce parasite loads, and restore the integrity of the epidermis without recourse to suffocating layers of powder. Yet memories of those powder-laden years linger in Versailles lore. Imagine, as you drift towards sleep, the soft rustle of skirts across the palace floors, the faint hiss of talc settling in velvet folds, and the incessant scratch of hidden parasites beneath layers of perfumed dust. Such was the paradox of Dirty Secret 14, that in seeking to maintain the purest facade, the court unwittingly invited a storm of skin afflictions and parasitic infestations, an enduring testament to the frailty that lies beneath even the most majestic veneer. Dirty Secret 15. The Final Decay. Versailles after Louis the Fourteenth. When Louis the Fourteenth passed away on the 1st of September, 1715, the glittering realm he had meticulously crafted was left to grapple with a legacy far less majestic, a palace crippled by its own filth. Within 3 years, a comprehensive inspection commissioned in 1718 revealed the full extent of Versailles' sanitary collapse. Inspectors reported that 7 out of every 10 drains were utterly blocked by decades of accumulated waste. Communal latrines lay in ruin, their crude masonry crumbling, and hundreds of stagnant puddles of sewage-coated water pooled in hidden corners, exuding a vapour so foul that even beggars stationed at the palace gates wore scarves over their faces. The report's data was staggering. Of the 120 documented drainage runs beneath the palace floors, 84 were found impassable, choked with a congealed mixture of human excrement, animal manure, and silt. The 12 main latrine pits once hailed as modern conveniences were collapsing inward, their walls crumbling into the cesspits they were meant to contain. Courtiers, who had not witnessed this decay firsthand, struggled to believe that the very seat of absolute monarchy was plagued by such squalor. One senator's memorandum from April 2nd, 1718, lamented that "we gaze upon gilded halls yet slosh through filth in our boots, as though Versailles were a marshland masquerading as marble." It would take decades before any substantial reforms took root. In the wake of the French Revolution, the newly established National Assembly recognized that Versailles' plight was symptomatic of wider public health crises. Between 1792 and 1795, engineers and urban planners undertook a bold program to lay modern sewer lines beneath the palace grounds. Cast iron pipes, each no less than 15 centimeters in diameter, were carefully slotted into trenches, dug beyond the palace's original footprint to intercept and redirect all waste toward a newly constructed sewer main running to the Seine. By the autumn of 1795, the network spanned over 3 kilometers of subterranean channels, finally giving Versailles a semblance of true sanitation. The results were dramatic. As the 19th century dawned, the incidence of waterborne diseases among palace staff plummeted. Medical records from the Hôtel Dieu Hospital in nearby Paris show that typhoid fever and dysentery cases linked to Versailles fell by 60% between 1796 and 1804. The introduction of flushable, sealed chamber pots, precursors to the modern flush toilet, further sealed waste away from human contact, replacing the centuries-old routine of chamber pot brigades and floating porcelain hazards. By 1820, the grand stables had been retrofitted with deep drain channels and mechanical ventilation to clear ammonia-laden air, and the once dreaded grotto latrines were dismantled entirely. Even the perfumed bathhouse of the Sun King was converted to a true water bath with heated supply and drainage. Where court physicians once extolled the virtues of talc and dry bathing, new hygiene manuals recommended regular immersion and soap, acknowledging that water, not powder, was the path to health. Versailles' grand narrative thus shifted from one of unchallenged splendor to a more nuanced story of resilience. The very halls that had once reeked of human waste now echoed with the soft rush of running water and the patter of modern faucets. Gardeners could finally till their plots without fear of infecting herbs with sewage runoff, and palace staff no longer feared nightly miasma patrols. Even the most skeptical visitors noted the stark contrast. The same hall of mirrors that once shimmered above floors, slick with excrement, now gleamed under chandeliers, refracted through windows cleaned by a new generation of custodians. Yet, if you close your eyes and let the lull of Versailles' fountains carry you away, you might still sense a ghostly echo of that bygone era, a faint memory of clogged drains, collapsing latrines, and the relentless drip of sewage under marble floors. It is a reminder that even the greatest monuments can be undone by neglect of the most basic human needs. And so, with Dirty Secret 15, we witness the ultimate paradox of Versailles, how a palace built to symbolize the zenith of human achievement succumbed to its own neglect, only to be reborn in the 19th century as a beacon of modern sanitation. May this haunting chapter fade into history as the echoes of filth give way to the soothing murmur of clean water, an enduring testament to the power of progress over decay. As the echoes of Versailles' hidden horrors begin to fade, imagine yourself reclining on a soft chaise longue in a quiet corner of the palace gardens, where the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of fountains replace every memory of filth and decay. In this final moment, let the grandeur of history settle like a light veil over your mind. warming you with the knowledge that even the grandest of human creations must reckon with the simplest of needs, and that, through the trials of neglect and squalor, progress can emerge. Over the course of these 15 revelations, we have walked the marble halls and shadowed grottos of Louis the Fourteenth's court, tracing the damp corridors where chamber pots swung and grotto floors flooded, feeling the weight of powdered cloaks and the sting of ammonia in frozen stables. Yet in each tale of inconvenience and discomfort, there lies a deeper lesson, that no throne is immune to the call of nature, and no palace can stand forever without humility and care for the most basic human necessities. Versailles itself, once a symbol of absolute power forged in gold leaf and ceremony, ultimately learned to embrace modern sanitation, to channel waste away in hidden sewers and tread upon floors blessed by running water. In this transformation, we find reassurance that even when grandeur succumbs to decay, the spirit of invention and reform can restore dignity and health. The palace's journey mirrors our own capacity for change, reminding us that awareness, compassion, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths are the first steps toward a cleaner, gentler tomorrow. Now, as your breathing deepens and the palace lights dim in your thoughts, allow every last hint of odor and unrest to dissolve like morning mist. Picture the fountains flowing clear again, the corridors echoing only with soft footsteps, and the mirrored halls reflecting nothing but stillness and peace. You carry with you the message that behind every shining facade lies a story of challenge and renewal, and that awareness of our imperfections can lead us toward greater care for ourselves and for each other. May this gentle descent into rest remind you that even the weightiest of tales can give way to quiet reflection, and that in the hush between heartbeats we find both vulnerability and strength. Sleep now, comforted by the knowledge that every secret laid bare brings us closer to understanding, empathy, and the simple grace of a well-kept home, be it a palace of kings or the sacred space of our own slumber. Good night, and if you've enjoyed this journey through the whispered corridors of history, please subscribe to our channel for more of the finest, most surprising stories yet to come. Sweet dreams.